going to be almost a continuation of last week. So we're going to start with just kind of a question. How many of you have ever looked back at a season and thought, you know, that wasn't that bad? That wasn't that bad.
Like the season last year?
Yeah, that was that bad. Maybe it was an old job, an old relationship, an old house, an old church, an old hairstyle. We have pictures that prove that maybe it was that bad.
Yeah, that's
That's how you look back.
That's my issue.
It wasn't that bad. But somehow, when enough time passes, we start remembering things a little differently. You know, those rough edges that we lived through, they start smoothing out. The painful parts kind of fade and the good moments get better. And before long, you know, those were the good old days. You know, and sometimes they were, but sometimes they were just old days. Right? We're just old days.
Some days were bad old days.
Sometimes they were bad old days.
There were some days.
There were some days. We remember the highlights and we forget the headaches, right? That's exactly what Israel is about to do. Now, before we jump in, I do want to show you how today's lesson is different from last week. Last week's lesson was called Free Indeed. And we spent most of our lesson talking about chains and bondage. We talked about old masters, the ways we continue to live like prisoners after we've been set free. In other words, last week's question was, why am I still living like I'm chained? But this week, we're asking a different question, is why do I keep wanting to go back? Okay. They sound similar, but they're not the same. Last week was all about your identity. This week is about direction. Okay. Here's what we're going to discover today. The greatest threat to Israel wasn't Pharaoh. It wasn't even Egypt. The greatest threat was that after God brought them out, they kept looking behind them. They kept that rear view mirror view. Okay. So today isn't just about leaving Egypt. It's about keeping strong enough to keep walking toward the promised land, even when you're remembering things in the past. We're going to start in Exodus, but before we get there, let's remember where Israel is at this point. Because if we just stay straight, we just jump straight in the passage, we're really going to miss how ridiculous this is. God has already delivered them from Egypt. The plagues happened, the Passover happened, the Red Sea, Pharaoh's army is gone. They're free. For the first time in generations, they're free. Imagine that. Their great-grandparents were slaves, their grandparents were slaves, their parents were slaves, and now suddenly they're not. That's the miracle they had prayed for, right? They had prayed for, they waited for. Freedom sounds wonderful until freedom gets inconvenient. Israel leaves Egypt, and then what happens? They get thirsty. They get hungry. They get tired. They can't see really ahead of them. They don't know, it's uncertain. And suddenly the wilderness doesn't feel nearly as exciting as it did when they first crossed the Red Sea, right? You know what I've discovered? Most people love freedom until freedom requires trust. Until it requires a certain amount of faith. Slavery was horrible, but it was predictable. It was predictable.
Familiar.
It was familiar. You knew what tomorrow looked like. You knew what was required of you. You knew where your food was coming from. You knew the routine. Freedom requires faith, and that's scary. And it's hard. So let's start with Exodus 16 and read 1 through 3.
The entire Israelite community departed from Elm and came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elm and Sinai. On the 15th day of the second month after they had left the land of Egypt, the entire Israelite community grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt. Then we set by pots of meat and ate all the bread we wanted. Instead, you brought us into the wilderness to make us this whole assembly die of hunger."
Wow. Because listen to what they said. If we had only died in Egypt. Really? That's your conclusion? God parts the Red Sea, destroys Pharaoh's army, delivers an entire nation, and 6 weeks later, they're ready to go back. They're ready to go back. Here's the phrase I want you to notice. They say, "We sat by pots of meat, and we had all the bread we wanted." Now, what are they remembering? The food. remembering dinner. They remember what they
That's bad
ate.
because-
The highlights.
Just saying.
That's true. But what are they forgetting? The slavery, the beatings, the oppression, the forced labor, the fact that they begged God to get them out of there. They're remembering the menu.
Yeah, they forgot how they felt when they sat down at the table
Yes. Yeah.
before they ate.
Yeah. Yeah. We talked about it earlier, but do you remember that? Do you realize that sometimes when we remember things, when we look back, we rarely remember the bondage. We kind of miss what the bondage provided. People don't usually say, I miss being addicted.
Yeah,
They say, I miss how it made me feel.
yeah.
Or I really miss that toxic relationship. They'll say, I miss having somebody.
Yeah.
Right? They miss what that bondage provided for them.
Right, that's good.
Yeah.
So they miss what Egypt seemed to provide and not what actually Egypt was. And that's really a dangerous place for your mind to go. I think this is the real issue. Israel was hungry. Israel isn't hungry because God abandoned them. They're hungry because they're in the middle. I taught a lesson on Sunday, on Easter Sunday a few years ago called the Saturday. They're kind of in their Saturday moment. They're between Egypt and the Promised Land. They're in transition. Sometimes we're in that transition. They're not where they were. They're not where they're going yet. So much happens in the middle. You know, you're not who you used to be, but you're not really who God's making you into be yet.
Yeah.
You're trusting, you're waiting, you're wondering. And sometimes when you're stuck in the middle, it kind of makes you question the journey. No, it's not really comfortable. Maybe I just need to walk back. Let's read 14 and 12, Exodus 14 and 12.
Is it not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, Let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness.
This was earlier at the edge of the Red Sea. This isn't the first time they've said that. It's not the first time they said that. The very moment things get scary, they get their slave thinking back on. We talked about that last week. They put on their slave hat again. There's something that really stood out to me this week about it. They were out of Egypt, but Egypt wasn't out of them yet.
That's good. That's good.
Egypt was still in them. That's the issue. God changed their location overnight, right?
Yeah.
But changing their thinking takes longer. It just takes longer, right? God can save a person, but it takes a while to learn to walk like a free person. It just takes long. It takes time, right? Learning to trust takes time. Learning to walk by faith takes time. Learning to stop running back to old habits sometimes takes a while. Gonna ask something a little uncomfortable, and don't answer out loud, but what is your at least? You know what I mean? At least back then. Maybe at least when I worried about everything, I felt prepared. At least when I kept that wall up, nobody could get too close to me. At least when I was drinking, I didn't have to think about anything. At least when I was in that relationship, I wasn't alone. At least when I was spending money I didn't have, I got a little temporary happiness. At least when I was gossiping, I felt connected. At least when I was sleeping around, I felt wanted. At least when I was scrolling for hours, I didn't have to think about my own life. You're at least. You're at least. Egypt doesn't always look like Egypt. Egypt simply is the old way of thinking that feels safer than trusting God with what He's got for your future, right? The wilderness was uncomfortable, no question about it. Israel was hungry. That was real. The hangry was real. Their concerns weren't made up. But what they forgot was God never, ever failed them. Not one time did God fail them. Every miracle behind them should have been evidence for the future that He was providing for them. The Red Sea should have reminded them, if God can handle this, He can give me lunch. Right? Let's start with part 2. This is where we're going to pick up. God didn't bring him out of Egypt to abandon them. He brought them out because He was leading them somewhere. By Numbers 11, and we're kind of just go with it here. By Numbers 11, Israel's been free for a while. God's providing manna every day. So kind of listen to the setup here. God's provided manna for them every single day, every morning, without fail. Can you imagine that? You wake up, you walk outside, breakfast is literally on the ground for you, just waiting for you. No Kroger run, no Walmart pickup, no standing in front of the refrigerator saying, what are we going to have? No meal planning, no grocery budget. No wondering why a dozen eggs requires a small loan. God literally delivers food from heaven every single day, and somehow they are unhappy. They're unhappy. If God started dropping biscuits and gravy in my yard every morning, I'd probably tell everybody I knew.
There you go.
Right? Y'all aren't gonna believe this. But Israel gets up every day and they see a miracle. And they eventually get tired of that miracle. It just becomes ordinary. Yeah. There's the manna. There's breakfast. It's another day. And before we're too hard on them, we should probably admit that we're pretty good at doing the same thing. Human beings can become so accustomed to our blessings.
Yes.
The thing we once prayed for eventually becomes the thing we complain about. The house we couldn't wait to buy, it'll need repairs.
Or it's now not big enough.
The what? It's not big enough. Yes. Yes.
We have 2 dogs, a baby, and a cat, so I don't think it's big enough.
You're telling on each other. It's not big enough.
Susie's had her eyes crossed.
Elbows to yourself.
I don't want to sit by him no more.
The job you prayed for, it's got difficult people, long hours. The answered prayer becomes ordinary, and ordinary blessings are the easiest blessings to overlook, and Israel's doing this. Let's read Numbers 11, 4-6.
The rabble then began to crave other food, and again the Israelites started wailing and said, if we only had meat to eat, amen to that. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost, also the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. But now we have lost our appetite, and we never see anything but this manna.
I love this passage. It's a little funny. Not because it's funny, but it's something. Did you hear the list? Fish, cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, garlic. They made a grocery list. They're literally making a grocery list.
Yeah,
This isn't a spiritual crisis. This is the produce aisle at Kroger.
that's right.
Right? They're standing in the middle of a miracle complaining about an onion. Right? Now, this is one of those moments where I stopped and thought, I really never thought about that before. Look carefully at what they say. We remember. We remember. They're remembering. That's the issue. Not hunger, not manna, memory. Our memory is a really powerful thing. Your memory can either strengthen your faith or weaken it. Memory could remind us of God's faithfulness, or it could kind of distort it. Israel's memory had become very selective. They remember the garlic, not the whips in this moment. They remember what Egypt gave them. They forgot what Egypt took from them. When we look backwards, sometimes we tend to edit the story. We do. We keep the highlights. We polish those memories. We soften the pain. And eventually, sometimes we start longing for something that really didn't even exist. It never existed to begin with. Sin works the same way. Have you ever noticed that temptation is basically selective memory? Temptation never shows you the whole story.
That's right.
It only shows you the attractive parts. It's edited. Nobody's tempted by consequences or regret or guilt or brokenness or destruction. Temptation only shows you the fish and the cucumbers and the onions and the garlics and the leeks and the whatever else. It never shows you those chains. Those are hidden by the produce. Right? Read Psalms 106, 13-15.
But they quickly forgot what he had done. They did not wait for his advice. They became greedy for food in the desert, and they tested God there. So he gave them what they wanted, but he also sent a terrible disease among them.
They quickly forgot his works. Not eventually. How fast?
Quickly.
Yeah. The manna itself was still falling. and they forgot. Here's another thing that stood out for me. They say there's nothing to look at but this manna. Really? Nothing? Manna is food from heaven, appearing every morning, free, without fail, provided by God. And their response is, this again? When Holly was little, evidently Mom fixed a lot of hamburgers. I like to grill. She liked to grill. And Holly was just really little. And she sat down at the dinner table, you know, and Mom put the hamburgers down. And Holly just exclaimed, hamburgers, hamburgers, hamburgers. All we ever have is hamburgers. I mean, imagine the Israelites. Manna, manna, manna. All we ever have is manna. That's what I thought of. I'm going to lovingly say sometimes we get bored with miracles. We get used to it. Healthy marriages, children we beg to have. They grow up and they can become a little annoying.
No,
I'm not sitting here anymore.
It's a new baby.
Yes.
The job, the refrigerator that stays full, the paycheck that keeps being deposited, the grace of God. We can become so familiar with blessings that we stop seeing them as blessings. That's the part that really grabbed me. The Israelites were mourning what God had delivered them from. Think about it. They were mourning the very thing that they begged God to deliver them from. When we start mourning what God has delivered from, we become vulnerable to turning back to it. That's exactly what Scripture repeatedly tells us. Remember. Remember what God has done. Remember what He brought you from. Remember God's faithfulness. Remember God's promises. Remember God's goodness. Because if we don't intentionally set our minds to remembering God's faithfulness, we're going to drift back toward Egypt. When
That's what it means, renewing your mind.
renewing your mind. Renewal of your
We
mind.
have to constantly renew our minds because the mind is still very attached to this world.
It is. You're exactly right.
It's so close. Here comes a picture analogy.
No, please.
It's so close. It's like a car. You have your windshield. You look out at it to go forward, but so closely to that windshield is a rear view mirror. And so, but that rear view mirror is only good for reference. Because if you keep staring in that rear view mirror, it means you're going backwards. You have to just glance at it to know where you came from or where you need to adjust so that you can move forward.
Absolutely.
And how closely that is to the rear view mirror and the windshield, of how close it is that we can easily step back, into that if we're in the wrong perspective there.
And the rearview mirror is small for a reason.
That's good. That's really good. It's small for a reason.
Mhm.
That's awesome.
Yep.
That's good.
Let's move on to part 3 because we're going to talk about that rearview mirror. Part 3.
Sorry, we didn't mean to jump.
No, you're fine. I love it. I'm so glad that we're on the same page. So Israel spent a lot of time looking backwards, and part 3 is kind of the meat of this. That's why I'm glad we get to spend some time on it. There's more scripture and more depth. Israel spent a lot of time looking backwards. They remembered Egypt. They remembered the food. They remembered what felt familiar. But the more they look backward, the harder it becomes to walk forward. So as I studied this week, I realized something. Maybe Egypt isn't the only kind of yesterday that can hold us captive. Because all morning we've been talking about bad yesterdays, bad habits, bad decisions, old sins, old wounds, old ways of thinking, the kind that God brings us out of. But I'll tell you something, not every chain is attached to a bad memory. Sometimes chains are attached to good ones. Sometimes we can hear a lesson like this and we just kind of passively sit through it and think, well, I don't miss Egypt. Well, that's good. Neither do I. But have you ever missed yesterday? Maybe a season when life felt simpler or easier, when the kids were little, when everybody was still around the dinner table, before life got complicated. Because some yesterdays were really wonderful. They were really, really good. And there's nothing wrong with being very grateful for yesterdays. But even good yesterdays become chains when they keep you from moving forward. When they keep you from moving forward to where God's trying to take you. One of my favorite examples of this is Peter. Before we read this passage, let me remind you what's happening. Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up on a mountain. for a brief moment, the veil's pulled back. They see Jesus in all his glory. Not just as a carpenter from Nazareth, but as the teacher. Not just as the teacher they've been following. They seem like they've never seen him before. And if that wasn't enough, Moses and Elijah appear. This was one of the greatest moments Peter would ever experience this side of heaven. Now listen to what he says. Read Matthew 17, 1-4.
And after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John, his brother, and brought them up into a high mountain apart, and was transfigured before them, and his face did shine as the sun, and his raiment was white as the light. And behold, there appeared unto him Moses and Elijah talking with him. Then answered Peter and said unto Jesus, Lord, it's good for us to be here. If thou wilt, let us make here 3 tabernacles, 3 booths, one for thee, one for Moses, and one for Elijah.
I love Peter. Because honestly, I probably would have said the same thing.
Let's don't come down off this
Let's
mountain.
let's just stay here. He basically says, let's just build houses. It's good up here. Let's live here. Can you blame him?
No.
Jesus never intended the mountain to become Peter's permanent address. Why? Because there were people down the mountain that were hurting, that needed him. There was ministry waiting for him down below. There was a cross ahead, a resurrection ahead, the Pentecost ahead. Peter wanted to stay in yesterday's blessing. But Jesus was calling him to tomorrow's purpose. I think some of us understand Peter more than we realize, because some of us aren't trying to go back to sin or back into slavery into Egypt. We're just trying to go back to a season, a good season, a moment.
It's the good old days.
The good old days that were really good.
Yeah.
That were good at the moment. A version of life that doesn't exist anymore.
They have little AI things now I've seen on some of the social media places that they'll go back, like kids who are talking, they can make them talk like they're from the 1970s. Look what you missed when this was our
Yeah, I've seen that.
time to come home, or things like that. And it really paints, and it makes you want, it's like, oh, those were simpler times, and those were, and you think about those things, and how people were just like, now people are spending time to talk about those old days,
Yeah,
and longing for. So
That's
what
true.
makes me think of that.
that's true.
Just long for drinking all the water out of the water hose, stuff like that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
J.C. Penney's boy
And
catalog.
people do that
Yes.
with church.
Yeah.
People do that with church.
Absolutely.
They long for the way it was 40 years ago, and 40 years ago was wonderful, but we just need to go back, and get back to that. And I'm thinking, you can go back there and try to recreate that, but God's not there because
No.
He has moved us on.
Yes.
He's here.
God's
He's
here.
now in 2026. He's not back in 1960 or 1980.
Yeah, because the world, again, I relate to that because I have gone back to listening to some of the music, thinking about where we were, and the Holy Spirit said, those were wonderful days.
Uh-huh.
But the world that you have to impact is not the same. And so the experience that you have for me has to be the same. It has to be different, not back then.
Yes. That's really good. Those are really good. Yeah. If we're not careful, we can spend so much time wishing that we were back there. You get consumed with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That you miss what God's doing here.
Yeah.
Yeah. God's not back there. He's not there anymore. He's moved on. He's moved. Now what's interesting is that Peter and Israel seem completely different. Parts 2 and 3 here so far, completely different. Peter wanted to stay in a good yesterday. Israel wanted to stay in a bad yesterday. But they actually had the same problem. They both stopped looking ahead. Peter couldn't see beyond the mountain. Israel couldn't see beyond Egypt. Both had become so focused on yesterday that they lost sight of where God was trying to take them. Now let's go back to Israel for just a minute. Eventually they do arrive on the edge of Canaan, the destination, the promise, the place where God had been taking them all along, flowing with milk and honey, where God intended them all along. They send in 12 spies. 10 come forward back terrified. They're just like, where's John's in the land? 2 come back believing, and suddenly the nation has a decision to make. Will they trust God, or will they trust what they see? Let's read Numbers 14, 1-4.
Then the whole community broke into a loud cry, and the people wept that night. All the Israelites complained about Moses and Aaron, and the whole community told them, "If only we had died in the land of Egypt, or if only we had died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to die by the sword? Our wives and our little children will become plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt?" So they said to one another, "Let's appoint a leader and go back to Egypt."
There it is again, those words. Go back to Egypt. Guys, they're standing on the edge of the promise.
They're there.
The destination's right there. And what are they talking about going back?
We've been trapping them for years.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's fast forward to the New Testament. The writer of Hebrews looks back at Israel's story. Listen to what he says. Let's read Hebrews 3:18-19.
And to whom was God speaking when he took an oath that they would never enter his rest? Wasn't it the people who disobeyed him? So we see that because of their unbelief, they were not able to enter his rest.
Because of Pharaoh? Because of hunger? Because why?
Unbelief.
God had proven himself so many times. The plagues, the Passover, the Red Sea, the pillar of fire, the pillar of clouds, manna every morning, water from the rock. And yet, when they reached the edge of the promise, they struggled with unbelief. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to trust God with yesterday? 6 weeks after the trial, we become great theologians. That makes sense now. God, I saw what you were doing. I panicked a little. I might have panicked. But I knew what you were doing. I saw it. I saw it coming. It's easy to trust God with our testimony after the trial. Right? But the hard part is trusting him with the testimony while it's being written. That's where Israel struggled. They had no trouble celebrating the Red Sea after they got across. But it's almost like they thought that the God who carried them across the Red Sea suddenly just retired. He was done. Here's the rearview mirror. Satan, why do you think the windshield is so much bigger than a rearview mirror? Because one's is designed for where you're going, and the other's designed for where you've been. Now, don't misunderstand me. The rearview mirror is very important, right?
Yes.
You need it. It helps you learn. It helps you stay aware. It helps you avoid accidents and mistakes. But can you imagine driving somewhere while staring in the rearview mirror the whole time? You'll end up in a ditch.
You're gonna miss where you're going if you stare at the mirror.
You're gonna miss where you're going. Yeah, and you'll end up in the ditch somewhere. You'll miss where you're going because you're obsessed with where you've been, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Have you known people like that? They spend so much time looking back at their past failures, past hurts, regrets, past seasons. They completely lose sight of where they're going. The rearview mirror has a purpose, but it's not your primary focus. Paul understood this. One of my favorite scriptures is in Philippians 3. Read Philippians 3:13-14.
Brethren, I do not count myself to have apprehended, but one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forward to those things which are ahead. I press toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus.
I love it.
Too.
And Paul's not saying that memory disappears. He's not pretending the past never happened. He's simply refusing to live there. He's not going to build a house right there. He's not going to build his house on the mountain. He's refusing to let yesterday determine today's direction. His eyes are fixed on where God's leading him. There's a difference between learning from your past and living in your past. Paul learned from it, and he refuses to live there. And then there's Elijah, and this is I'm on the very last thing. We're getting out early today. I'm either way too long or way too short. I'm so sorry. I'm
That's all right, it's good.
I'm getting there.
Just
I'm
exactly.
trying.
You hit it all the time, doesn't matter, cause people.
Trying. Then there's Elijah. Elijah called it. Elijah did something fascinating. I love this. 1 Kings 19:20 through 21. What did he do when Elijah called him?
Elijah then left his oxen and ran after Elijah. Let me kiss my father and mother goodbye, he said, and I will come back with you. Go back, Elijah replied, so that what have I done to you? So Elisha left him and went back. He took his yoke and oxen and slaughtered them. He burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he set out to follow Elijah and became his servant.
Why did he burn the plows? Why did he kill the oxen? Why not just leave everything there?
He wasn't going back.
Elijah understood something. If he left everything intact, he'd have a way back. He'd have a plan B,
It's good.
an escape route, right? A return hatch, a way to go back to what was comfortable, so he burned it. I'm burning it. He was essentially saying, I'm not going back. I'm not doing it. Some of us want God's future while keeping our plows parked in the garage. We keep the receipts just in case. We want the promised land, but we'd like a return policy, please. Elijah said, no, I'm throwing away those receipts. If God's calling me forward, I'm on that. I'm on it. So here's the question that I want us to wrestle with this week. What keeps pulling our eyes away from what God has placed in front of us? Maybe it's a past failure, a wound, a fear, a bitterness. Maybe it's a really, really good season that we miss, that we just keep trying to circle back to. You know, God, if I can just circle back to when it was good, then I'll pick up from there. Maybe it's a version of life we wish we could recreate, or maybe it's simply the temptation to look back when life gets hard. What keeps pulling you backwards? Because freedom isn't just getting out. Freedom is continuing forward and not going back. Any thoughts or questions?